Hey, 8th graders, new chapter today that we're starting. So it's chapter, I don't remember what the chapter is called. 1 second here. Change over time, that's what it's called. So our first lesson is called Darwin's Theory. So we're going to learn about Charles Darwin. So our My Planet Diary is a voice from history, Charles Darwin. So in 1839, he published his book called The Voyage of the Beagle. And then we're going to read the excerpt about an animal that he encountered in the Galapagos Islands. So the inhabitants believe that these animals are absolutely deaf. Certainly they do not overhear a person walking close behind them. I was always amused when overtaking one of these great monsters, as it was quietly pacing along, to see how suddenly, the instant I passed, it would draw in its head and legs, and uttering a deep hiss, fall to the ground with a heavy sound, as if struck dead. I frequently got on their backs, and then giving a few raps on the hinder part, they would rise up and walk away, but I found it very difficult to keep my balance. So one of the questions that I don't have up there, but is what kind of animal do you think he's describing? And their answer that they give is a giant tortoise because of the shell, and then them moving slowly, and then retreating into their shells when scared. Okay, so let's learn a little more about Charles Darwin. What was his hypothesis? And then what is natural selection are our two key questions for today. So first, our first vocab word is species, which is a group of similar organisms that can mate with each other and produce offspring that can also mate and reproduce. A fossil, which we just talked about in our last chapter, the preserved remains or traces of an organism that lived in the past. The exact number of species is unknown because many areas of Earth have not yet been studied. That is a true-false question on your assignment. So comparisons that he made to South America organisms. Birds and plants on the Galapagos Islands were similar to those on the South American mainland. So the Galapagos Islands are right off the coast of South America. He was convinced that species do not always stay the same, though. And then comparisons he made among the islands. He discovered that there were differences among the organisms on different Galapagos Islands. So adaptations. An animal such as the finch developed different beak shapes and sizes that were well suited to the food they ate. So different finches needed a different beak shape and size. So what is adaptation? It's an inherited behavior or physical characteristic that helps an organism survive and reproduce in its environment. Evolution, we also recently talked about change over time, the process by which modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. So Darwin hypothesized that species change over many generations and become better adapted to new conditions. So it's a scientific theory. It's a well-tested explanation for a wide range of observations or experimental results. So next we have artificial selection. Only organisms with a desired characteristic, color, shape, size, etc. are bred. So a lot of times now this happens with dogs. If people are a dog breeder, they'll pick specific ones so that they can have the desired characteristics for those dogs. So artificial selection is basically someone interfering to make the animals reproduce and produce a certain type of offspring. Natural selection is the process by which organisms that are best adapted to their environment are most likely to survive and reproduce. So this goes in with overproduction. So that's when more offspring than can survive are produced. There's not enough resources such as food, water, and living space for all of these animals. Variation is any difference between individuals of the same species. And then competition. So since food, space, and other resources are limited, the members of a species must compete with one another to survive. It doesn't always involve physical fights. It definitely could, but it does not always. So for example, some turtles might not find enough to eat. Then a slower turtle might be caught by a predator, while a faster turtle can escape. So that's natural selection, where the slower turtle is caught and killed, basically. So selection, our other key point, Darwin proposed that over a long time, natural selection can lead to change. Helpful variations may accumulate in a species, while unfavorable ones may disappear. It's kind of like with the characteristic choice. All right, so environmental change, another true false question on your assignment. A change in the environment can affect an organism's ability to survive and therefore lead to natural selection. So, for example, birds fly south for the winter, usually. I know that we're south, but in the Midwest, a lot of birds fly south for the winter. So, if there would be like an early winter before the birds flew, that could affect their ability to survive because of the change. Now, that wouldn't necessarily be a permanent change, but it's still a change that can affect them. And last, genes and natural selection. So without variations, all the members of a species would have the same traits and the same chance, sorry for typing that incorrectly, chance of surviving and reproducing. Darwin could not explain what caused variations or how they were passed on, but scientists later learned that variations can result from changes in genes and the shuffling of different forms of genes when egg and sperm join. Only traits that are inherited or controlled by genes that are passed on to offspring can be acted upon by natural selection. Okay? So our vocab words: species, a group of similar organisms that can mate with each other and produce offspring that can also mate and reproduce. Fossil, the preserved remains or traces of an organism that lived in the past. Adaptation, an inherited behavior or physical characteristic that helps an organism survive and reproduce in its environment. Evolution is change over time and the process by which modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. Scientific theory is a well-tested explanation for a wide range of observations or experimental results. Natural selection is the process by which organisms that are best adapted to their environment are most likely to survive and reproduce. Variation is any difference between individuals of the same species. So please complete the Edmodo questions for lesson 1. Like I said, give me some hints on some of those questions. There will be matching with the vocab words. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns or anything like that, and have a great day.